Hey guys, hey, it's Matthew, and I just wanted to do this real quick kind of tutorial on brightness and contrast in Adobe Photoshop and how it can be used to do some simple image editing. So essentially, sometimes if we take a photograph, a couple examples here I'd like for us to use and maybe talk about. Sometimes you take a photograph and it just kind of feels like the subject, like, this has a lot of light in the background. And so, most cameras, they're shooting on this auto setting, right? And they're doing their best to sort of scan and get the best exposure. But we can make some slight adjustments in Photoshop with brightness and contrast to improve things a bit, okay? And so in the background, it's pretty clear why this is darker right there, and it's really not a bad photograph. I can still kind of see, like the subject's face pretty clearly, but this is a lot of bright sun here at the beach, and that's why this is just a little bit lighter. So we're going to make a slight adjustment with that one. And it's actually and this one is shot outside, of course, but this is a similar circumstance where this individual there's this bright light kind of happening on this back wall, and somehow the camera was taking a look at that and thought that was the level that it needed to adjust to. So it's taking a multitude of different samples, most likely, and it's doing its best to get something balanced. But we're gonna have to bring these into Photoshop and just, play with them a bit, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and open up the first one, sample one with Adobe Photoshop. And what I just did there is I have right click enabled on my mouse, and I'm on a Mac, by the way. So I'm going to right click, then say open with, and then I want to open it up with Photoshop. Okay. As soon as I do that, I can hit Command 0 and I can hit Command negative to zoom out. I can hit Command positive to zoom in. And if I just want to see the entire photograph as large as possible on my screen, I can hit Command 0. And I think that those shortcuts are really valuable when you're using Photoshop and really any Adobe application. The next thing I want to do is I want to show you guys, let's see, if I go into image, wait, hold on. I can make some adjustments, okay? So there's brightness and contrast right here, but I want to show you in this circumstance, I'm going to be actually causing damage to the original photograph. So if I can, change the brightness and so forth and the contrast, make some changes. But if I hit OK and then I hit save, that's permanent. And I don't necessarily want to approach Photoshop and photo editing or image editing that way. So I'm going to hit Command Z, which is really important because that undoes, excuse me, the previous command. It's undo. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock the layer. Okay. And by the way, when I'm in Photoshop, I like to be in the essentials mode. Okay. So go ahead and make sure that you're in the essentials work mode when we're talking. And so that way our screens will look relatively similar. And if they still don't look quite right, you can come down here and say reset essentials. All right. And then on the right hand side, you're going to see the layers palette. There's a little thumbnail of the image that we're working with. And you'll see on the right hand side that there's a little lockbox. So I'm going to unclick that lockbox, and that's going to give me the keys to the castle, so to speak. And after I unlock that layer, I'm actually going to want to resave this because I want you guys to realize or notice that this image is actually a JPEG file, okay? And so now that we've unlocked the layer associated with this JPEG file, and if I hit Command S, I want to come over here and go to Save As. I did that a little bit fast. I'm going to cancel out of that file, Save As, and instead of saving it as a JPEG, I actually want to save it as a Photoshop document file. So I'm going to come down here to this drop down where it says JPEG, click it, come up here where it says Photoshop, boom. Notice how it's saying sample-1.psd now instead of JPEG. I want to make sure it's going to the right location. So I have a course folder, and within that course folder, I have different folders for projects. And I would advise that you guys do something very similar on your end so that you can find things. My desktop is full of so many files, and maybe yours is too. And so those are things that, maybe I'm just kind of downloading briefly and I need to look at them briefly. But if you really need to know where something is on a computer, I would advise that you get organized and you put things in the right place where they're supposed to go, okay? So when I save here, it's not going to overwrite the sample-1.jpg, which is pretty much a digital negative. Rather, it's just going to put the new PSD file right next door, okay? So I'm going to save that and then I'm going to hit OK. And so now I've got a Photoshop document to work with. As mentioned, you can come over here under Image, and you can just kind of look at all these different options that we've got here. But again, that causes direct damage or changes to the actual negative, and we don't want to do that. Alternatively, we can do non-destructive editing by coming down here. There's this little icon right here. And we can create a layer for brightness and contrast instead of um, working directly into the meat of the file. So now there's the original image. Here's the brightness and contrast layer. And I also want you guys to notice that it's given us a similar sort of interface to work with where we can adjust the brightness and the contrast up here, okay? So essentially, this is like a very essential image editing uh, application that we're about to explore here. Because again, sometimes images that you capture on your iPhone or phone or even regular camera when it's on the auto setting, they're going to be a little bit underexposed. And so what we can do is we can just adjust the brightness. So let's see what happens when I adjust the brightness. I don't think there's any real like right or wrong way to do this. And so notice how when I start pushing that brightness, I am kind of burning out or adding additional exposure to that background, which is okay. But the important thing is that the subject is more visible and lit up, okay? So the magic number I'm seeing here is 58. So I'm kind of pushing things. You can always go back to square one by setting this to 0, okay? So that's what it was before. And if we push it, we can see that's a much better, kind of stronger image that really shows this individual's face uh, more accurately or more visibly, rather. Um, on the opposite spectrum, I can actually reduce the brightness, and obviously like now everything's kind of getting a little difficult to see. So I'm going to come back here and I liked that number. I remembered that number 58, so I'm going to set it here. So that's managing brightness, okay? The other thing that I'd like for you guys to be aware of is contrast. And contrast is really important to me in general with art making and I think, just visual legibility. Um, Contrast is basically like pushing the darks so that they're darker and pushing the lights so that they're lighter. And sometimes you'll hear folks talk about an image feeling a little bit flat. And basically what that means is that maybe there are too many kind of like middle of the road mid-tones that are really dominating an image or a painting. And contrast is really a wonderful thing in art because it reduces the flatness of an image. I think another way to describe it is that when you push contrast in a photographic image or a painting or a drawing, no matter what you're working on, it's going to add sort of like this narrative sort of drama to the situation, okay? I don't know if anyone here is into old movies, but like an old noir movie has really intense blacks and really intense whites, instead of a whole lot of like middle of the road midtones. And that adds a lot of drama to the cinematography or the viewing experience. And similarly, we can adjust contrast in Photoshop really easily. So brightness is always a good place to start, but also let's see what happens when we start playing with contrast with this particular image. And look at that. So, the darker tones are getting a little bit more sort of visible. And the light, like it's doing that when I'm pushing the contrast, it's pushing the extreme lights and the extreme darks simultaneously, okay? And I can actually reduce contrast as well. Let's see what happens when I go this direction and see how the image is kind of getting a little bit sort of flat. And so, um, you guys, this, when you're doing photo editing, I think actually, first of all, you need a pretty good display. So make sure your display brightness is kind of like turned up, all right? Because it's important for you to be able to see the image accurately on your screen. Um, but I like contrast, so I'm probably going to err this way. But where I was going with, that comment was that there's no right or wrong way to do this. You have to trust your eye, and you have to set up a circumstance with your workstation where there's this impression that whatever you're seeing on the screen is accurate. But the real truth is, just imagine this circumstance. Like everyone is looking at photographs and images on a variety of different displays these days in a variety of different circumstances. Some folks are on public transportation and maybe they turn down their screen brightness on their phone because it's about to die, and an Apple display has a certain way of rendering color compared to like say like maybe like a Dell computer display. So all of these, there are so many variables with this process, but really you just have to trust your gut and set up a circumstance with your screen that hopefully is sort of like a broad sample. Okay. So I'm trusting my intuition and I'm going to push my contrast a hair up to the number 18. Okay. After I feel like I'm happy with this image, I can actually hit Command S for save. And then if I go back to my Finder, again, I just want to remind you guys that the original negative is still here. Okay, so there's the original negative, and you can even kind of see on my screen those changes are quite dramatic. So adding some brightness and some contrast can do a lot. Okay. Um, Another thing about non-destructive editing is that there's a layer here. And this is such a beautiful thing. Look at this. You can actually turn that layer on and off so you can see the differences real time in Photoshop. So that's why you definitely want to use these adjustment layers when you're doing image editing. And you do not want to go into the image directly and damage the original digital negative. That's pretty much how we could describe this. And um, I can turn off that layer as well. Okay, I want to actually do a second image, just to kind of like compare and contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and save this image. And then I'm going to hit Command W to close out that image. Now I'm going to come over here. And by the way, like when I'm navigating, I hit Command and then Tab on a Mac, and then I can sort of scroll through different applications that I have open. And I actually want to look at the viewer right now. So I'm going to make sure I select the viewer so that this is highlighted. And I also have this folder open on my desktop, so it works out perfectly. Okay, so here's that second image. Okay, so I'm going to right click, open with Adobe Photoshop. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock that layer. So it'll give me the keys to the castle. Then I'm going to come up here and go to File, Save As. And I don't want this to be a JPEG anymore. I want it to be a Photoshop document now. Okay. Look at all these options, but I think for this circumstance or this project or assignment, however you want to describe it, save this as a Photoshop file. Okay. Now it says sample-2.psd. Hit save. And of course, I'm saving everything in one location here so I can find things later easily. So there are the two original JPEGs. And now I've got these two Photoshop document images that I'm working with. See how like even like the size has really expanded quite a bit. The first sample, the digital negative initially was 1 MB. Now it's 12.9 megabytes, 2 MB originally. Now it's 67.3 megabytes. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea, Photoshop is adding some oomph and some latitude to these files so that we can work with them digitally. Okay, let's go back to Photoshop. So if I can Command Tab on my Mac and then sort of toggle, I'm using my pinky to hit Tab and sort of scroll through these applications. I think that's very, very handy. So now I'm gonna go to Photoshop and then let go. And now I'm back. Now Photoshop is the application that's live on my Mac. Okay, so here's the original negative, and again, I want to add a non-destructive adjustment layer. So I come down here in my layer palette. It says create new fill or adjustment layer. Click. Look at all these different options. We're going to go through some of these, of course, but there's brightness and contrast. And I'm going to use my intuition and just kind of add, see, that burns everything out. That's too much. So I just kind of want to add some light on her face. Okay. If folks aren't aware, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Albuquerque, New Mexico, but this is used to be one of my favorite restaurants there for breakfast. And so this is a friend of mine. We were having some good pancakes. Okay, so that feels pretty good. I'm just using my intuition, but I also maybe want to add some contrast a little bit. Just a little bit, not too much. Like I almost kind of feel like there is an art to this. So I just pushed the contrast a little bit. And remember, you can compare like the original to the changes that you've made by simply coming down here in the palette, or excuse me, the layer palette, and toggle that little eyeball on and off. Wow, that's quite a difference, right? So I think we really did a good job with some simple editing there. So I'm gonna hit Command S and save. All right. Thanks, guys.